Sheikh Hamdan's Yorkshire tour with his girlfriend, Shamma, began as a journey painted with the softest hues of romance and serenity. The rolling hills of the countryside seemed to open their arms, welcoming them like old friends, as the morning mist lifted over fields dotted with stone cottages. Fazza, with his poetic soul, saw in Yorkshire a landscape where time slowed, where history whispered through every cobblestone street, and where he could walk beside Shamma without the heavy cloak of royalty, simply as a man in love. Their arrival was quiet yet full of emotion, each glance exchanged between them heavier than words. They began their exploration in the charming town of York, where the ancient walls still stand as guardians of centuries gone by. Shamma held his hand tightly as they wandered through narrow lanes, stopping at little bookshops, admiring stained glass windows, and pausing beneath the shadows of York Minster. For Sheikh Hamdan, the grand cathedral was not merely stone and glass but a cathedral of emotions, reminding him of the timelessness of love. He whispered verses to Shamma as they stood before the towering arches, and she smiled in a way that made the old city feel alive again. The journey carried them further into the countryside, where the dales stretched endlessly, wild and untamed. Fazza loved the way Shamma's eyes lit up when she saw the valleys, sheep grazing lazily, and waterfalls tumbling down rocks polished by centuries of water. They rode horseback together along the bridle paths, laughter echoing against the hills, their voices mingling with the wind. For a moment, it wasn't about the royal life, the crown, or the expectations. They were just two hearts seeking peace in nature's embrace. Shamma, dressed in simplicity, carried an elegance that blended with the countryside's rustic charm. She walked with grace along stone bridges, her reflection shimmering in the rivers beneath, while Sheikh Hamdan, often ahead, would turn back to watch her with a tenderness that only a poet could hold. Each moment they shared became a verse, unspoken yet deeply understood. The countryside became their diary, and every step etched a new memory upon its pages. At Bolton Abbey, beneath the ruins of a monastery where centuries of silence lay, they found a sacred stillness. Fazza recited verses as they sat upon moss-covered stones, and Shamma listened intently, her hand resting over his. It was here that their souls felt closest, where the history of love and faith woven into the stones seemed to bless their union. He told her that one day, even their story would be etched in history, not just as royalty but as two lovers who dared to live freely. They wandered into little villages where life moved at a slower pace. In Haworth, home of the Bronte sisters, Shamma felt the spirit of old romance echo through the cobbled streets. Fazza teased her by comparing her to the heroines of timeless novels, and she responded with laughter that seemed to melt the chill of the Yorkshire breeze. The locals, unbothered by titles, saw only two young lovers savoring life's simplest joys. For Sheikh Hamdan, this was the greatest gift, anonymity in love, far from the watchful eyes of the world. Their tour also carried them to the moors, vast and hauntingly beautiful, where purple heather stretched as far as the eye could see. Fazza and Shamma walked hand in hand across the rugged land, their silhouettes carved against the dramatic sky. The wind howled, the earth stretched, and time itself seemed to pause as they stood atop the moors, gazing at the horizon. Shamma leaned into him, and Fazza wrapped his arm around her, realizing that even in the wildest of landscapes, love could create a sanctuary. They shared quiet meals in rustic inns where fireplaces crackled and old wooden beams whispered stories of past travelers. Fazza delighted in seeing Shamma enjoy warm Yorkshire pudding and traditional dishes, her smile softening with every bite. Over dinner, he would read her lines from his journal, verses he had penned secretly about her, about their journey, about how love always feels more real when shared away from the noise of the world. She would answer with her eyes, filled with unspoken devotion. In the evenings, when the sky turned to velvet and stars scattered above them, Sheikh Hamdan and Shamma would retreat to their countryside retreat, where windows framed the endless fields. Fazza would write late into the night while Shamma rested her head on his shoulder, their silence more eloquent than words. Sometimes, he would recite what he wrote, and she would respond with her laughter or a quiet kiss upon his cheek. Love, in Yorkshire, became not just an emotion but a rhythm, steady, unwavering, eternal. At the coastal edges of Yorkshire, they stood watching the waves crash against the cliffs of Whitby. The salty air wrapped around them as Fazza spoke about the vastness of the sea being like his love, boundless, untamed, and eternal. Shamma held his hand and said nothing, for she knew his heart was speaking in a language only hers could fully understand. Together, they looked at the horizon, knowing that no matter how far the tide pulled, they would always return to each other. Even in the quiet of small tea rooms, over steaming cups of Earl Grey, their connection was luminous. Fazza often caught himself admiring how Shamma carried herself, how even in simplicity she radiated warmth and regality. She was not just his companion on this tour, but the muse that brought color to his verses. Every sip of tea, every shared smile, became part of their story, woven gently into the fabric of Yorkshire's timeless charm. As they prepared to leave Yorkshire, Sheikh Hamdan reflected on how the land had offered them more than beauty. It had given them intimacy, a space to be themselves without pretense. Shamma, with her soft presence, had turned every hill, every ruin, every inn into a palace of love. For Fazza, it wasn't about grandeur but about moments that breathed life into poetry, moments that could not be bought or staged, only lived. On their last morning, mist rolled across the valleys, and the air carried a bittersweet chill. Sheikh Hamdan took Shamma's hand and led her to the edge of a hill where the land stretched endlessly before them. He told her that Yorkshire would forever remain sacred in his memory, not for its beauty alone but because it was the backdrop of their love's quiet unfolding.